began with verse 21 of chapter 5. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered round him while he was by the lake. Our narrative probably begins in Magdala, where Mary Magdalene was born, on the Jewish side of the Sea of Galilee. We saw last week how Jesus had crossed the lake to Gersa in the region of the Gerasenes and healed a man in a desperate condition, a man who was possessed by many demons. But now he'd crossed back again, making his way to his home in Capernaum, which is a bit further north, according to the beginning of Mark chapter 6. In contrast to the Gerasenes, who were terrified of him and begged him to go away, the mostly Jewish population of Magdala welcomed him with open arms. Large crowds from the Jewish towns had followed him assiduously day after day. They were forced to leave him behind as he crossed the lake to the Decapolis. No self-respecting Jew went over there. And beside that, then he had to wait for a bit, and they knew he'd come back. And they'd be watching when he did. No doubt they saw the boat returning while it was still a long way from shore, and by the time it had reached the land, a large crowd had well and truly gathered. Luke tells us, now when Jesus returned, a crowd welcomed him, for they were all expecting him. The boat lands, the crowd surged forward, and he's almost crushed with all the people. But suddenly the focus changes. There's a man running down the hill towards the crowd, thrusting his way through the throng. And this is no ordinary countryman, but a ruler of the local synagogue, someone responsible for taking care of the building, of ordering and supervising the services. He was probably a constitutional judge of the local court as well. In every way, a prominent and respected citizen. And the crowd are beginning to give way to him, because there's something in this man's haste that compels them to let him pass. A desperation in his eyes, perhaps. The grim set to his jaw that discouraged comment. And finally he reaches the master, and oblivious of protocol or social appearance, he throws himself down shamelessly at Jesus' feet. And Mark records his poignant cry, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her, so she will be healed and live." She's his only daughter. She's all of 12 years old, and the Greek words translated dying literally mean that she's gasping her last breaths. And her parents watch helplessly at the bedside of their beloved little girl as she fights a losing battle for life. Can't you feel the pain and the urgency in this father's heart? Those of us who have children certainly can. All you have to do is to imagine it's your child lying there, gasping for every breath. And does not a cold shudder steal over your heart, even now? I know that feeling, and so does Val, my wife, because we've been there, and we've watched, and we've grieved. And already the professional mourners are crowding around the house. They're in silence, waiting for that first shriek of agony that heralds this little girl's last breath. The death of a child to such an important, prominent citizen called for a fitting public expression of grief, a loud and long cacophony of lamentable noise, heart-wrenching. But now the healer has come, and now the father lies pleading at his feet. Why do that? Surely because Jairus believed that Jesus could help. But his belief has a condition. Jesus must reach the girl before she dies. He has to be there in order to heal her. He has no concept that all it takes is a moment of the divine will, and she will live. Do we place limitations on Jesus' power? Are there situations in life or in death that you feel lie beyond the reach of his love? Jesus agrees to go with Jairus. You don't have to have all your theology correct in order to follow Jesus. You don't have to have everything right before you can cling to him. And yet, an almost farcical situation develops. On the one hand, Jairus is desperately trying to hurry Jesus along as fast as politeness will allow. On the other hand, the crowd is pressing in on him and thoughtlessly frustrating Jesus' every effort. Jairus must have thought to himself, surely the teacher can see the need for haste. He remains silent, but can't you feel the panic rising in this man's heart? And I tell you what, it's about to get worse. Enter the woman. She's the next one on the list of desperate, helpless people that began with the Gadarene demoniac. And this poor woman has been suffering in pain from a flow of blood, some sort of internal hemorrhage that amounted to a perpetual period. And she's been suffering for as long as this little girl has been alive, 12 long years. And Mark adds the explanation that she's wasted all her livelihood on doctors who, by their expertise, have successfully made her worse. Such a condition rendered the woman unclean according to the Hebrew law. And it's all spelled out, if you want to read it, in Leviticus chapter 15. Anything she touched would be labelled unclean. Anyone she touched would be labelled unclean. Anyone who touched anything that she'd touched would be labelled unclean. And they had to go and take a bath and wash all their clothes that they had been wearing. They had to do it straight away, and then they had to wait a whole day before they could even be with anyone else. Can you just imagine the sort of life that this poor woman has led for the last 12 years? She's deprived of every human touch, every intimate moment. Everyone keeps their distance from her and carries a spare cake of soap just in case. That being the truth, then, why is she squeezed in amongst all the others in the crowd, touching them left, right and centre? Isn't that completely against the law? Yes, it was. But she's there because she's desperate. She had heard about the things that Jesus did. She's desperate. But she's also afraid, and that's why she comes up behind him. And when she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. And she does. And she is. Now, it's important not to get the wrong idea here. Jesus wasn't some kind of magic stone or Aladdin's lamp, rub here gently and make a wish. You have to understand why the woman did what she did. She was unclean. She had absolutely no right to be there. She was breaking the law. And the moment she voiced her need, the master, as well as the contaminated crowd, would know all about it. How could she expect Jesus' healing grace and favour under those circumstances? She was more likely to be shoved out of the crowd on the end of an oar. Once Jesus realised that power had gone out of him, and he turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" The disciples missed the point. When it comes to spiritual things, they often do, I'm afraid. And they said to Jesus, "You see the crowd against, you see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you asked, 'Who touched me?'" Do you think it's remotely possible that Jesus, God incarnate, doesn't know exactly who she was and what she was there for and exactly what he's done for her? Of course he knows. But he acts to draw out of her what she was afraid to tell. He wants the conversation to continue because he wants her to understand why she's been healed. And he wants the crowd to acknowledge that she has been. The only way of guaranteeing her future acceptance in that society. We read that Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. And then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet and, trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. And what follows is, I think, a truly beautiful moment. Jesus expresses his exquisite understanding and love so delicately, so succinctly, with his very first word: daughter. Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be free from your suffering. It's her faith that has healed her, not her touch. Can you imagine the joy in her heart? I like to think of her skipping out of the crowd with tears of joy running down her face. But the narrative now returns to Jairus. Progress towards his home has ground to a halt. I wonder what he was thinking. It's not hard, is it, to guess? What about my daughter? I've been an upright man all my life. Why does the master allow this woman who broke the holy law to risk my daughter's life? Surely this woman could have waited another hour. I mean, after all, what's... And his eyes had drawn towards the men approaching from his home. Men with downcast eyes and grim faces. And can you imagine what is going on in his heart at that moment? Surely, no, surely not this. While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter's dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" I wish they'd said that differently. I wish they'd come and thrown their arms around him in sympathy. But it doesn't read that way, and it doesn't read that way in any of the accounts. And notice the cruel barb of unbelief in their rhetorical question. Face up to reality. When it comes to death, even Jesus, the teacher, is helpless. Have you ever tortured yourself with what if? What if the crowd hadn't got in the way? What if the woman hadn't come? What if the boat had got across the sea a bit quicker? The master had arrived sooner? There's nothing crueler, I think, than those words, what if? But let me tell you, that there is absolutely no what if in the mind and the purposes of God. There never will be. We can't see things from God's perspective. And sometimes the very worst happens, and we may be tempted to cry out, Lord, why? What if this hadn't happened? Now, I'm getting old, and I can tell you that you may never get an answer to that question. Val and I don't know why our baby boys had to die, but they did. How can you believe in those instances that God still loves you? And that's a good question, isn't it? And there's a really, really good answer to that. Because he sent Jesus, God's only Son, God Most High, creator and sustainer of the entire cosmos, to come to this tiny little planet, to take human form, and unthinkably to die on a cross and to rise again to pay the price of my sinfulness and yours. What more does he have to do to show that he loves you? And overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, don't be afraid, just believe. Jesus says, and this is the unequivocal sense of the Greek words, don't be afraid, just go on believing. You came to me believing that I was able to help while she was alive. Well, go on believing that I'm able to help even if she's dead. I'm adequate for when there was hope, and I'm still adequate for when there seems to be no hope. Just go on believing. Jesus takes Peter, John, and James with him, and the five of them continue to walk towards the house. And we've just read the account. We know that something absolutely stupendous is going to happen. And Jesus chose these three men to be eyewitnesses to the key events of his life on earth. They were the ones, for example, present when Jesus was revealed in all his glory on the Mount of Transfiguration. Now another stupendous event of major significance is going to occur. And I would like to emphasize that this is not a piece of theatre. It's history. Jairus' house lies at the intersection of a particular longitude and latitude, and if you went and dug there, you would find the remnants of the bricks that built its walls. There are sufficient eyewitnesses to what took place for their testimony to be legally accepted in any Jewish court. Such evidence is still acceptable today. Our entire judicial system exists on that premise. And so these five men arrive at Jairus' house, and you could hardly miss it. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. And he went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. The professional mourners were doing their thing. For the average family, rabbinical law specified a number of mourners. And rather oddly, 2 musicians. But Jairus was a ruler of the synagogue. He was a prominent citizen, and so a very large team of professional mourners would have been hired. The place is in uproar. They're there everywhere, probably even in the child's bedroom. And now Jesus does something which at first blush seems seriously strange. He asks them, why all the carry-on? And what socially dysfunctional idiot walks into the scene of a child's death and asks that question? It gets worse. He says, the child is not dead but sleeping. That's exactly what the Greek words mean. All three accounts agree. You can't twist it. You could argue perhaps that Jesus is speaking euphemistically, but surely it's not the time. Taken at face value, it seems almost in totally appalling taste. Here are the grieving parents at the girl's bedside, and he's telling everyone she's just asleep. No wonder they ridiculed him. The Greek verb there, katagaleo, is in the imperfect tense, which means that they kept it up. They kept ridiculing him. And for good reason, they were scandalised. Now just ask ourselves a question here. Is Jesus telling lies? What does he mean? Well, the girl is just asleep. Now I'm guessing here, but the simplest explanation is that Jesus is telling them the plain truth. The girl was dead, but in a moment of the divine will, she was resurrected to new life. Now she's asleep. And Jesus is going to wake her up. And the very last thing he wants is this dear little girl to wake up to all this racket. Wouldn't that be awful? And so we read, after he'd thrown them all out, that reads better than he just put them out, they threw them out. He took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him, and he went in where the child was. And he took the little girl by the hand and said to her, Talitha cum, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up. And immediately the girl stood and began to walk around. She was all of 12 years old, and they were completely astonished. Mark leaves Jesus' words in the Aramaic because that was a vernacular expression for getting a little girl up in the morning or after siesta. It's like we would say, darling, wakey, wakey. It's just a beautiful, intimate way of waking up a dear little girl. Isn't that the most beautiful moment? Can you imagine the astounded expressions? The music of joyful tears, the little girl running over to mum and dad and giving them a big comforting hug. And the parents weren't the only ones astonished. The Greek verb there is existemi, from which we get the English word ecstasy. They were overcome with amazement and joy. But the account doesn't quite end there. Jesus gave them strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat. The last instruction is surely an expression of Jesus' continuing love for the little girl, but why the first? And it's not a suggestion, it's a strong command. Why not let everyone know that they had witnessed resurrection and not just healing? This is one of the most significant events in Jesus' ministry. Why not tell everyone? But just, if you will, think for a moment. Outside the house are the mourners. And outside the mourners by now, I'm sure, are the crowd. Remember them? You think they've gone away? Not likely. And from inside the house come the sounds of a child's voice and cries of laughter. Outside you can hear a pin drop. The crowd nudge closer. The mourners are getting squashed and begin to feel a little redundant. Can you imagine the effect of someone bursting through the front door and yelling, "He's brought her back from the dead! Jesus has power over death," which of course is true. The next second they'd be frog marching into the nearest cemetery, wouldn't they? "There they are, Lord. They're all dead. Do your stuff." Resurrection is not commonplace now. And it certainly wasn't commonplace during Jesus' ministry. Here we have a sign, a foretaste of the truth that Jesus has the power to make dead people live. Death had no power over him. The resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead is the best attested fact in all ancient history. Jesus didn't come to put the undertakers out of business, but one day they will be. Jesus said in John's Gospel, "Do not be amazed at this, for a time is coming when all who are in their graves will hear," that is God's voice, "and come out, and those who have done good will rise to live, and those who have done evil will rise to be condemned." Have you always done good? Have I? Have we loved God with all our heart and soul and mind and strength and loved our neighbour as ourselves? No one's done that. No one's done that. We're all in desperate need of God's forgiveness. And just like Jairus and the others, we're totally helpless. The Bible tells us that in our natural state we're like dead people walking, desperately in need of life. And to who can we turn? Jesus answered, and you might remember the occasion. He said this, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die." No one who ever came to Jesus in humility and belief was ever turned away. And if you would become a follower of Jesus, you have to come to him the same way. You must go on believing that he is able to remove your guilt and give you a new life that will endure for eternity. Life doesn't end with the coffin, the grave, the mound of earth over someone we love. Jesus is still able to make dead people live for eternity. Paul says it this way, "Our citizenship is in heaven, and we eagerly await a Saviour from there, the Lord Jesus Christ, who by the power that enables him to bring everything under his control will transform our lowly bodies so they will be like his glorious body." Isn't that a wonderful promise? Isn't it? If you belong to Jesus, how long will you live? Forever. That's the truth and the invitation. Don't walk away from it.